Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast, When Tech Meets Ed. This is Professor Jie Ren. Today, I'm very happy to have Dr. Sophia Babna from the University of Minnesota to join us to discuss a very important topic, which is women in tech from the perspective of networking. So, Sophia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. So, why don't you tell us about you to our audience?
I'm a faculty and a professor at the University of Minnesota at the Carlson School of Management. And one of the areas of focus is my research around increasing women's participation in the workforce, especially in STEM fields. And this really has two branches. So one of them examines the effect of legislations. So we may have new maternity leave legislation. And how does that affect, is it the intent is for it to be effective, but is it really effective? And the other is in areas where we know there are frictions, what interventions can be introduced to reduce those frictions and improve the outcomes for women. So that's the type of work I do.
Okay. So I know that you have done many research projects along these lines, right? And then, first of all, I really want to know that what is the motivation that drew you into this domain? Let's start with that, and then elaborate on the research projects.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, and I've been thinking about it for a bit, right? So it's not one factor. I wish I could just say it was this one, and that's what got me started.
Yeah.
So it starts a little bit with my background. I am my bachelor's degree is in engineering, so computer engineering, and we were 2% women in my engineering school.
2%.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, just want to share some statistics to you. I went to a university, tech related university in China, and then it's not 2%, but definitely it's like low. I would say maybe 20 or 30%, or even lower than that. That will be all the girls, like women, right? Compared to the counterpart in terms of the gender. Wow, 2%.
Yeah, and this is
God.
overall in the engineering school, right? There were certain domains, say
Of
computer
course.
engineering, which had slightly more women, but still it was never more than 25% in any area.
Wow.
So that was one factor which obviously shaped my understanding of the situation of women in tech. I've worked in tech for over a decade. So I worked in tech consulting for over a decade. I've been an entrepreneur and also a manager. So in all of these different fields, women are underrepresented. And so to me, I think I had a good understanding of some of the issues, concerns. I had a lot of colleagues who've talked about things that matter to them, differences that they saw. So there was that grounding, and then. Close to when I was graduating from my PhD program, I saw a grant application from the Kauffman Foundation, and it was a call for proposals. And this particular proposal talked about increasing women's participation in entrepreneurship. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. It's an interesting and important question. And I also felt it was something that, I felt I could contribute to, that I had,
100%.
I had some research ideas that, potentially, could fit the call. And so it was almost as if, I had the background and there was this little trigger, which sort of nudged me towards,
Yes.
and so then I put in the application, and what I found, I got the grant, and what I found is that really,
congratulations.
People, thank you. It was a long time ago, but thank you. Yes, there's sometimes some things, that there are some things that shape the way you move forward, right? And so that, I think, was one of the moments, and I found that people really resonated to the research, right? Like women and even men. Like I've never had, men tell me that this is not important, that this doesn't make sense. So I just found that there was a lot of, people responding well to it. And then there was another really pivotal moment, I feel. So this was when so my co-author Russell Funk and I, we have several papers together, and we were interested in exploring incubators and how they function. And I am a firm believer in engaged scholarship, which is about really asking questions around what's happening in the real world
Mm.
versus just sitting back, and looking at what the literature has to say and moving forward from that.
You want to
Not that
impact
that's
on the business context,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and not that the other approach is bad. It's just my style. That I'm
Mm.
maybe because I've been a practitioner for over a decade. As I said, I worked in tech.
Mhm.
So the first thing we did was to go and talk to a bunch of companies that are incubator companies in Minnesota.
Mm.
And one of the places we went to, they said to us that we spend a lot of money on networking events,
Mm.
and we are not really sure whether there's any payback to that.
Mm.
Are there any useful connections being made here?
Mm.
And is this, really worthwhile, or just are people just connecting with people they already know, and, we're spending this money and time and
Mm.
there's no payback? And so we went back and I looked into the literature, like what does research tell us about how networking evolves?
Mhm.
And then from there, I realized, especially in fields where women are a minority,
Mhm.
there can be very different outcomes for men and women at
Mhm.
networking events.
Mhm.
And
I
what
noticed that as well.
you did,
Yeah,
so tell me
100%.
more. Tell me more, Joe, about where have you, what context have you seen this?
So, okay, so I like to attend networking events even before I graduated from the PhD program, right?
Okay,
So I know that you know this as well. There is a website that's called Meetup,
okay.
right? So there could be like events, for example, in New York City, surrounding certain topics,
Hmm.
right? For example, technology topics, etc. And then sometimes I would go there just to see, right, what is
Hmm.
happening about the industry, etc. And also just to, network with people,
Hmm.
strangers. And notice that, especially for the tech topic related events, in terms of the participation rates across genders, and you definitely will see like more men than women there. That's number one. And then another thing is like I see usually not every time though. Usually you will see people are in clusters, and then could be and then some men like dominating the conversations, etc. And also you also see men are speaking up, right, confidently and everything, but women are more shy in terms of listening to the
Hmm. Hmm.
conversation. So I noticed that,
Yeah.
right? I think part of that could be, okay, so since we're talking about this, right, I also want to hear your opinion in terms of, um, you said that 2%, right? That is a, so I was quite, I was like, ooh, I understand that the percentage could be low, but 2%. So how do you feel to be the only or the few girls in that environment? Like, how
Yeah.
did you feel? Do you
Yeah.
feel like you're proving yourself, like you made it? Or at sometimes you feel like, I shouldn't be underestimated because of my gender?
Yeah. So a lot of interesting things you said here,
Yes.
Jill. So I want to actually start out with what you said about your experience at the conference,
Mhm.
right? So I'm so glad you said that, because that is exactly what I hear over and over again. Hey, and the research that we've done around networking, which I'd love to talk about a little bit more in a bit, but that when women hear about that research and the potential interventions,
Mhm.
firstly they feel validated because of the experiences you shared.
Yes.
And then they're like, oh, yeah, those interventions actually make sense.
Yeah.
And, and also we show, in a very rigorous way that
Mhm.
they do make sense.
Mm.
So I wanted to respond to your first part about your experience, which
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. And then, it's really interesting. When I was in an undergrad,
Mm.
I don't know, maybe I was naive, or maybe you just take life for granted.
Mm.
I really didn't notice
Mm.
that this disparity was a thing, that it can
Mm.
impact outcomes, that there are systematic differences. I just went about life, right?
Yes.
I was in college, I was doing my thing, I was having a fabulous time, I had great friends, and I was going about my thing, right?
Yeah.
At that time. But then over time, you begin to realize that,
Mm.
that there are differences, there are, as you said, you go to events, there's differences in the way women are perceived versus men.
Mm.
There's differences in career progression. But at that time,
Mm.
specifically, I don't think I was conscious about it.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay, so I know that we are going to talk about the networks, right? The networking perspective. And then, especially in that very context, right? You have way less women, like again, in undergraduate studies, you have way less women than men. Do you think that will also help you in a way in terms of you are forced to connect with like the males networks? Do you think
Mm-hmm.
that will,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
meaning like all, for example, all female school versus a mixed school? And then like, except here we have the ratio is not like a perfect balance in terms of 50-50, but
Okay, so you brought up something really interesting. You said all female school versus all, versus a co-ed, right?
yes.
Actually, I have so many things that I want to say in
Yes.
response to this.
I'm so happy you are
But
here on this episode.
since you mentioned that all female, so there's a really interesting study where this is a Bellevue. Um, and what she studied was exactly what you said,
Mm,
which is all graduates from all female colleges versus co-ed colleges,
mm,
and of course she controls for a whole bunch of factors like qualifications, major, jobs, types of jobs they applied for, salary expectations, everything.
mhm,
And what she finds is that women coming from all female colleges actually received lower job offers, like
mm,
as in lower salaries.
mm,
The salaries were significantly lower than
mm.
women coming from co-ed colleges,
Wow.
in terms of their job offers.
Okay.
And what the study suggests is this was because of the perception of your network,
Mm,
not your real network, because she actually measures their real networks,
mm,
their peer advice networks, the networks that they had in terms of people already in the profession, both male and female,
mm,
all of that, right? So she controls. So it was not your real network, but the perception of your real network, which
mm,
made employers feel that women didn't have accurate information about going salary rates, and
mm.
hence they were offered significantly lower salaries when you came from an all women's
That's
college.
very interesting.
Yeah,
That's
so
very
that was
interesting.
a really, I thought, it's a small study in terms of sample size, but it's, I think, a really well done study, especially because they consider all of these different factors, right? The
Mhm.
actual networks and the jobs, the qualifications, all of that, and
Mhm.
yet they find this difference.
That's really interesting. That's truly, right? It's not really about the actual network and then how much effort that you can put there to build your actual network. It's also people's perception, the employer's perception of you, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
That's okay. So before we move to the networking part, right? Maybe let's spend a little bit of time to talk about qualification, right?
Hmm.
For a person's success, for example, right? And then we talk about like women being shy, right?
Hmm.
Maybe some women could be shy, and then maybe they could be like socially shaped,
Hmm.
etc., etc. Do
Hmm.
you think that in addition to the networking parts,
Hmm.
what advice that you would give to women in terms of being more active, and then in terms of maybe forming the networks, and then believing in yourself, don't
Hmm.
feel like you are
Hmm.
underestimated, you can do anything, that kind of advice to
Yeah.
cheer them up?
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that comment. And the thing is that what research tells us is that women tend to be a little bit more hesitant in
Yes.
terms of reaching out.
Yes.
And they believe that, networking for a certain outcome feels a little insincere. I'm
Mm.
not talking about a specific woman, but women in general, right?
Hmm.
And
Across societies, not
so
necessarily in one culture, could be very much across
yeah,
societies.
yeah,
Hmm.
this is I mean, maybe there are certain cultures where this is not true, but
Hmm.
in general,
In
like
general,
yeah.
yes.
And so they feel a little bit hesitant in terms, they feel it's insincere.
Hmm.
uh, and then the other aspect is,
Insincere in what way? Meaning it is
so I'm
very
doing it for,
transactional,
yeah,
like not
I
like
have an
truly. Hmm.
ulterior motive,
Mm.
like uh,
I
I'm
know what
not
you're saying.
doing this, there's a motive, and hence it
Mm.
feels insincere.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that, again, this is what research shows, is that women feel that they need to exhibit reciprocity in
Mm,
their networking exchanges.
mhm,
So when they approach very senior people, they feel like they have less to offer, and
mm,
hence they feel reluctant to do that,
mm,
right? To do this type of networking because they feel what they have to offer is lesser.
mm.
And I'm not saying, this is right or wrong. This is just what research tells us, right? This is how, whether they're, I don't think they're doing it consciously, but this is how this is how they feel. And hence it has certain effects on the outcomes, right? So if you're more reluctant than men to reach out to senior people, then the outcomes are also going to be different, right?
Mm.
And so now, a lot of conventional advice, many people would say that women should lean in, they should do more, they
Yes.
should put themselves out there. And I'm not disagreeing with that, right? That's one approach.
Mhm.
But is that approach right for everybody, right? Some women, even if you tell them, it's hard. Uh,
It is hard.
it is
Yes.
hard.
People pleaser, right? Etc. Etc. Very much relevant to like the
Yeah.
women's community, for
Yeah,
example. Hmm.
yeah. And maybe those hesitations are still there, right? And then they
Hmm.
have to overcome them and, push forward. So yes, I'm not saying that advice is not good, but
Hmm.
it's been around. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that organizations can do something, right? Companies and organizations can do things to make things easier.
Hmm.
And
Such as.
also, well, before I go into the such as,
Hmm.
I really want to talk about why. Why
Yes.
is it that we want organizations or companies or people organizing these events to do something different? Because not I feel, like factually, I
Hmm.
believe, and the research shows that there are actually structural barriers that affect women's networking outcomes.
Mm.
And I want to talk about them because then that sets us up to understand why it's not enough to tell women, go and lean in, go and do more, put yourself out there,
Mm.
right? Because once we understand these structural barriers, then we can say, okay, given this situation, these are the types of, such as,
Yeah.
interventions that we can
Yes.
introduce.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about two things,
Yes,
right?
please.
So the first one is what would happen when we go to a event, say, where we
Hmm.
barely know anybody.
Hmm.
Okay, we don't know anybody. There's uncertainty. There's ambiguity. Like, who should I talk to? What should I
Yeah.
say? And some people are extroverts. Like, when talking about people in general,
Hmm.
you come to an event and there's, okay, now what,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so what we do naturally, right? We not thinking about, we're just doing it naturally, is that we gravitate towards people like ourselves.
Mm.
And
Similarity.
similarity,
Hmm.
right? And we're not even thinking, but we do that. And so what's going to happen is that women are more likely to talk to more women.
Mm.
They'll talk to men too, but
Mm.
in the conference, you're likely to talk to more women.
Mm.
Men are likely to talk to more men. So now, why? So, that's fine. Why should it matter, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the two structural issues that come into play here.
Okay.
The first structural issue is that women are the minority in many fields, such as tech, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we talked about this 25% number.
Yes. Hmm.
So if you're talking to more women, you're talking to a subset, and there's 75% there
Mm.
that you are talking less to, right? So you're talking in this little cluster.
Mm.
Then the other thing is that in fields such as tech and many other fields, men tend to occupy the more senior positions.
Yes.
So now, when they're more senior and they're the majority, and if you are speaking to the smaller, more likely to speak to the smaller group of women who are less senior,
Hmm.
then your outcomes from that event are also going to be different, right?
Hmm.
Because if you're more senior, then you tend to be more connected, more influential, have more information about opportunities. And so the outcomes for men and women are likely to be different from
Hmm.
these events.
Mm.
Um,
Just
and
because of the similarity,
uh,
because of similarity along, for example, this lens of gender,
yeah,
right? And then the outcomes as time goes by could be massive.
Yeah.
massively different.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I want to talk about one more pathway and then also tell you how different these outcomes can be through our research, which
Mhm.
we've examined, right?
Yes, please.
So the other pathway is, so now we're talking about a situation where you almost know nobody at the conference.
Mm.
Then think about another situation where, say a few people, say,
Mm.
25% or one third, right?
Mm.
And what would happen there? How would that unfold? Is that people once again they don't do it consciously, but they gravitate towards people they already know. And again, given what I said in the first place, how do networks form?
Yeah.
Women's
Similarity first, and then the second one will be familiarity.
Yeah, so this is the familiarity, right?
Yes.
But because you have formed your networks earlier, which have more women, so with the familiarity, you're again going to connect back with the women that you know because your network has more women, right?
Exactly.
So from both pathways now, you're connecting to more women,
Mm.
which means again that your outcomes are likely to be different because men are better connected, more senior,
Yeah.
right? And there's an interesting paper by Ingram and Morris which examined. So they took a bunch of executives. These were managers, bankers, consultants, entrepreneurs, 100 of them, and they asked them before a mixer, post-work mixer, what is your goal for this event, right? Is it meeting new contacts, meeting existing contacts? What are you thinking about? And they all overwhelmingly said it's about making new connections. And they had them all wear an electronic tag, name tag, and do whatever they did at the mixer, and then examined who did they actually connect with.
Okay.
And they found that overwhelmingly, they actually connected with people they already knew.
No.
So again, it's not just women, everybody does this
Everybody does
naturally,
that,
right?
exactly.
So why? Because it just takes so much more work it is work, right?
Yeah.
To now get to know somebody. It's cognitive work.
Yeah.
And also, you don't know how you're going to be received.
The unknown, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes can be terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. So now those are the structural pieces at play, right? The seniority of men and the fact that they are the larger proportion in that field, in most fields such as tech, right? So now, if we take that forward, we wanted to say, okay, I want to connect it back to my incubator example where they said that, is this paying off or not?
Yeah.
And then we have these structural issues. So Russ, my co-author Russell Funk, and I, we wanted to examine firstly, so we want to confirm that are women's networking outcomes different or not than men's when they go to a majority men conference? And then for us, that was not enough, right? We wanted to examine what would be the effect of interventions that we designed to change these barriers. And these interventions...
Is it the equivalent, like the intervention can translate to the equivalent of organizational support or environmental support?
Yeah.
Like one organization could implement in order to foster the networking, the better networking for women.
Exactly. So what can organizations do is what we start to answer, right? That was your earlier question.
Yes.
So that led to, okay, what are these interventions or what can organizations do?
Yes.
What can they do in an event to make these outcomes different for women, right? So what we did is we obviously incubators are really small and the events, at least the ones that we connected with, tended to be small. Not really a good place to examine this question. So we partnered with an organization that runs conferences. Okay, and they run conferences in big data and analytics, AI type of conferences, really large conferences, close to 1,000 people each. And what we did is we said to them that, firstly, we connected because they also want to foster connections, right? They want their events to be successful in terms of people meeting each
it's
other.
mutually beneficial.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so essentially worked with them. And what we said was that before the conference organizer would send out messages to the attendees.
Mhm.
Okay. And we took the attendee pool, which is close to 1,000 people. We randomly assigned them to three buckets. Okay. So one bucket we call the control. And then we had two others where we had one where one of them was a search intervention,
Mm.
and I'll explain that in a minute, and the other was a social intervention.
Mhm.
And the idea here was, and of course, that both men and women are in these buckets, right?
Mm.
And just like any conference in tech, and uh, even the proportion of women in tech,
Mm.
which is reflected in conferences in tech, there were about 25% women.
Mm.
Right. So now we had both men and women assigned into these three buckets,
Randomly assigned.
randomly assigned to be super important, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Little detail there, but super important
Yes.
because that ensures that we don't have any selection into one of these buckets.
Very correct.
And they were not aware that we were studying them, right? As part of this, their networking in this conference. So there was no active observer bias in terms of, okay, if you know that you're being observed, you may behave in a certain way,
Mm.
right? So
Yes.
they were randomly assigned to these three buckets. One bucket was a control. And the conference organizer to the control sends an email saying, networking is important. Please remember to network.
Mm.
And here, really, what we wanted to examine is organically what is the differences in outcomes for men and women
Mm.
in terms of networking to confirm that these structural problems that we talked about, and also the other barriers such as your hesitation to network,
Yes.
things like that. Do they have effects on the outcomes for men and women? And given this prompt, we examined several outcomes. So firstly, we examined uh, post conference self reported outcomes of networking.
Mm.
So the organizer always sends a survey after the events, and in their survey they embedded a few questions
Mhm.
related to networking. So
Okay.
one was, how many new contacts did you meet? How many minutes on average did you spend with each new contact?
Mhm.
How many existing contacts did you meet? How
Mhm.
many minutes on average did you spend with existing contacts? Then we also, apart from self-reported, we tracked these people on LinkedIn, and we
Ah.
saw their connections on LinkedIn. We observed their connections on LinkedIn, and we did another thing where we actually tracked them for a year after the
Mm.
event,
Okay.
and a job change for a year. Okay,
Oh, to
so
see the real effect of the networking.
yeah, and
Mhm.
especially of our interventions, because we
Mm.
wanted to see how our interventions affect, all of these outcomes,
Mhm.
right?
Especially long term.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I'm going to get back to long term. Remind me because I
Yes,
have
that's
something
important.
interesting to say
Yes,
about
yes.
long term later.
Because we want to know the cumulative advantage as the starting point,
Yeah,
how much cumulative advantage you can get if you just adjust, right? Like
yeah, a
how you
little bit.
network at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, so basically the control we find on all of these outcomes, self-reported as well as the ones on LinkedIn, women did significantly worse than men. So
Oh,
this confirmed what we were trying to
confirmed.
say,
Exactly.
right? So now that really sets us up to say, let us talk about interventions.
Yes.
I mean, there is a difference that we show, and now and the literature suggests it, but we are actually showing it empirically
Mhm.
that this is happening.
Mhm.
So now let's start thinking about interventions,
Yes.
right? And so let me start with a search intervention. Now, this intervention is motivated by the idea that, if you are networking with, just women who are less senior, uh, you may be less likely to get information about important opportunities or resources or diverse opinions on something that you're working on, which could be a new solution,
Mm.
right? So we call this the search barrier, the search for useful or helpful information.
Mhm.
And what we did here is, so just say you were at the conference,
Mhm.
and you were given, so this group, the second bucket search intervention,
Mhm.
were given sent an email with 16 recommendations of people they could connect with.
Mm.
So you might have received me a bunch of other people, right,
Mm.
to connect with. So you got 16. But
Mm.
what was really interesting about those 16 is that each of us were connected to 16 others.
Mm.
So that meant you were 1 degree away from 16, but 2 degrees away from 256.
Yes.
So now we've suddenly shrunk the network. So if you came up to me and said, I'm really interested in such and such, I'd say, wow, I just met so and so who's doing exactly that,
Yeah.
and can make that connection between
Connection.
you
Mhm.
two. So we essentially shrunk the search network, and wanted to see whether it's is it because women are having difficulty finding useful connections. The other one we did was to try and reduce social barriers. This was called the social intervention.
Mm.
So here the email, again, it sent them 16 connections, but these 16 connections only received each other. So
It's a
they were,
closed
it
network
was a
then.
closed network
Mm.
of 16. And so everybody in that 16 received the same 16. And we said you are part of a group.
Mm.
Okay. So what this meant was we were thinking that group identity would kick in,
Yeah,
right?
belongingness to the community.
Yeah, because
Mhm.
even just assume you assign people to a blue team and a red team. And suddenly you're like, okay, I'm going to help my blue team, right? Like,
Yes.
because I'm in this team, even though I don't know them,
Yes.
right? So this is my group.
Mhm.
And so what would happen is, say, it would, help remove some of the frictions related to, say, post Me Too, where men and women, feel that they may not want to spend too much time with each other for fears of how it might be perceived or how it
Mhm.
might look,
Yeah.
right? So now there's legitimate reason for me to interact.
Mm.
Or, somebody may feel very comfortable going and approaching a senior. That hesitation goes away because you might feel like, okay,
We are a team now,
we are
right?
assigned to this group, and
Yes.
I'm here,
Mhm.
to chat with you, right?
Yes.
There's this legitimate reason. I wanted to reduce some of the social frictions.
Mm.
And what we found, very interestingly, was that the search intervention,
Mm.
it basically brought women's outcomes, networking outcomes, for all the outcomes that I discussed: self-reported, number of new contacts met, time spent with new contacts. Then the LinkedIn, contacts on LinkedIn, job change for a year, all of them to the level of men's. And obviously significantly higher than the control group. Women in the search intervention were significantly higher than women in control.
Mm.
So that tells us something, right?
Yes.
That really, if we reduce the search intervention, the search barriers through an intervention such as ours, that it can significantly improve outcomes for women.
Mm.
Um, and So obviously the other interesting question is what happened with your social
Yes.
intervention?
I want to hear the rest of the story, so please.
So the social intervention here, what we found is that women spend significantly more time. Uh, that is, if you were in the social intervention, you spent significantly more time with new connections than women in control. So you were part of a group. So, you spent more
Mm.
time with people in your with those connections, right?
Mm.
Which makes
Kind of like
logical sense.
nurturing this new relationship
Yeah. So
with
you were,
each member of this group.
yeah,
Mhm.
with members of the group,
Mhm.
right? So you spent more time with them because you're part of the group. But because of the way that those connections were structured, where you had 16 people connected to each other
Mhm.
versus having that second degree of 256, where you met more, where you could potentially meet more useful connections.
Mm.
So that pathway led to a different outcome,
Mm.
right? And again, it depends on what you're trying to do, but these are useful. Both of them are useful
Mhm.
interventions.
Can I ask a question in terms of these two treatment groups, right?
Mhm,
So you have this search group, the other one is social group, but they generate different, as you said, different outcomes.
mhm,
One probably is about how many people you get to connect to
mhm,
through your connection to start with, or through your connections
mhm,
connection.
mhm,
The other, so the first one is reach. The second one probably will be the strength of the tie,
Mhm, mhm,
right? So
mhm,
like if you want to get closer to
mhm,
each
mhm,
member of
mhm,
this team, maybe that would be the second one, even though in terms of the performance indicators, the third one is so the second treatment
mhm.
group, right, the
The
social one,
social, yeah.
is not behaving so well compared to the
Yeah.
search
Yeah.
group.
Yeah, it's possible, right? Like that, that these perhaps stronger ties could lead to
Mm,
different outcomes over time.
yes,
So we don't want to discount them. It's just a different result
yes.
from that intervention,
Hmm.
right? And so interestingly, when you mentioned long term,
Long term, yes.
uh,
Get to that.
so this year is the 10th year since we ran that study.
Oh, nice. You get to
And
see the longitudinal
so we
effect.
are really interested in going back and
Hmm.
seeing what is a longitudinal effect,
Yes.
right? And also, to your point, maybe the social intervention had different long-term effects
Mm,
because we know what companies those connections were at, right? Each
mm,
connection. So we can also look at people's movement across, both interventions, your connections, first degree, but second degree, your connections in this in that little closed group.
yeah.
So I'm really excited about the potential for this, to go back and look at that data,
Mm.
in terms of long-term effects, like what's happened, after 10
Yeah.
years.
Is it the quality of the relationship or is it the quantity of the connections
Yeah, and
that will
and we
contribute?
do know the search intervention did help immediately, right? Like we
Yes.
did see
Yes.
those immediate impacts, right?
Mm.
So we now it's about like what is it long term for each of them. So super excited about that.
It's super exciting. I'm so looking forward to next time. Maybe we can like chat again
Yeah.
on this topic. Um, so given this fantastic research, um, can you also translate that into the individual level effort in terms of what each woman could do to could learn from it? The second one, because the intervention that you said is very much about the organizational support, right?
Hmm.
So how can an organization to turn that into their own intervention?
Yeah, so I have actually so much that I want to say
Yes.
here. Okay, I'm going to start with a super interesting study by Wu and Kane,
Mm,
where what they do is they examine the effect of a search. It's for a consulting company,
mm,
where they introduced a tool through which expertise search tool. So people could search for expertise within the company.
mm,
And what they found is that, again, remember the connection, the word search, expertise search, and the search, the search intervention that I had.
yes.
So when people could find, experts, uh, they women benefited significantly more.
Mm,
So again, it was a matter of the way their networks lay, right? They didn't know how to find the expertise within their organization.
mm,
And this is a consulting company. I'm talking about 2008 to 2010 dollars. And what they found is after the introduction of this tool, because they were able to connect with not only more people, but make more diverse connections in terms of finding diverse knowledge
mm,
within the organization, which they measured,
mm,
they actually their billing increased. So in 2008 and $10, women's billing per month
mm.
increased by $1,000 a month per woman.
Just to increase the visibility
Yeah,
of the expertise from the diverse group,
yeah,
and then you see like more billable hours, and then
yeah,
oh,
yeah, because they could
wonderful.
find the knowledge within the organization,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So that I thought was amazing,
Yeah,
right?
it's
To
amazing.
have, a tool that can have this type of an effect.
Hmm.
So that's one. The other one I would say is very related to the conference interventions that we designed, right? So you could do exactly the same thing, and you can find that, the details of that design in my MIS quarterly publication,
Hmm.
and you all could do that where you have 16 connections or whatever may be the right number
Hmm.
depending on the size of the conference, and then they're connected, each of those people are connected to a different set of 16,
Hmm.
or you could have closed groups, but I'm going to suggest two more.
Yes.
Okay, these are far simpler because that takes a little bit of design, right? The 16 plus the 16,
Mhm.
and it it requires a bit of time, but two super simple ones, which is not going to consume too much time.
Mhm.
One of them I've been running at one of our annual conferences for the last 3 years, workshop on information systems economics,
Mhm.
and it's received really good feedback. By both men, women, senior people, junior people. The intervention is simple. Uh, what happens is within the conference agenda, I talked to the organizers and managed to get anything between an hour and a half, whatever they're able to give me, I take it. But the one thing that I ask is that there's no parallel sessions. So it's
Mhm.
during the day, not the end of the day, because otherwise it feels like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Maybe I should, go home or change or go back to my conference room,
Mhm.
whatever. Maybe. So during the conference event, during the day,
Mhm.
and no parallel sessions, because then you're not conflicted about should I do this or this,
Mm.
right?
You're not distracted by
Yeah,
other events.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, because now, you're trying to figure out what
Mhm.
what is better or worse, right? So
Mhm.
those are the two things I ask for. And it is in the conference agenda, marked as whatever you want to call it, structured networking or whatever name, but
Mm.
networking event.
Mm.
And then what happens is,
And that is open to all people, not just women.
yeah, all people,
Mhm.
because that's really important.
Yes.
Like, we talked
Just
about
want
the
to
need for
clarify.
these
Yes.
diverse
Mhm.
ties, right?
Mhm.
And so this is useful not just for women, though, as you'll hear.
Yeah.
It's useful for both senior, junior, women, men.
Mm.
I think it has broad applicability.
I agree. Mhm.
And so basically, what I do is, then I have in advance set up at the venue tables with numbers. Okay? And as people enter, each one is given a card,
Okay.
and the card has two numbers on it. These are table numbers, and these table numbers are randomly assigned.
Mm.
So when you walk in, you don't know what table number you're going to receive. So it's not as if in advance, somebody can say, I really want to meet such and such. Can you assign me to this table? Because I don't know who's going to enter when and which table they'll be at, right? So it's truly,
Random.
there's some sort of serendipity here,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And also I design it so that you have about six or so people, in each table. Of course, it's hard to predict exactly how many people are going to come to the event, but
Mm.
around that many people per table. So the numbers are such that you have about that many people per table. The
Mhm.
assignment. So they come in, they get the card, they go and sit down at a table, and they meet these other people who randomly show up at the table. The tables are all numbered, and then the back of the card has a few prompts. So the
Mm.
first prompt is an icebreaker. Something like if it's in a different city, we had it once in Thailand, this conference. So we said, what is something interesting you did in the city or
Mm.
plan to do? Then there's two questions that we have. One is, tell us about this is a research conference, but you can change it to your context,
Mhm.
a research project that you're really excited about.
Mm.
And the next one is, tell us about something research or teaching related that you want advice or help on.
Mm.
And so, then, after a point in time, depending on how much time is allocated, I announce, and then they move on to the next, they move on to the next table number in their card. Okay.
Mm.
And so the feedback that I've received overwhelmingly is for juniors, it legitimizes talking about their research,
Mm.
right? So I can go up to somebody and say, because I can't just go to a conference, find somebody, and just start talking about my research, right?
Yes.
But now you're at this table, it's an opportunity for you to talk about your research or talk about something that you could do.
Mm.
That where you need some help or some ideas, something that you're trying to solve, right?
Mm.
So it legitimizes being able to talk about this
Yeah.
to all these people whom you couldn't just approach randomly and start this
So that
conversation
setup
with.
does help the
Yeah,
participants, especially the junior
yeah,
people. Mhm.
exactly. And there could be senior people in the table who
Yeah.
who, who might say, or even not senior people who might say, okay, you know what, there's somebody in my department who's studying something really close. Let me
Yes.
make that connection for you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then senior people. So I've heard things like, I really connected with people who I wouldn't usually talk to, right?
Mhm.
Why? Because senior people have been going to these conferences for a long time.
Mhm.
They tend to have their networks, and they may not be doing it on purpose, but they may just end up talking to people they already know, right?
Very much so. Yes.
So we talked about that
Yes.
familiarity,
Yes. Very much
and
so.
so they are in their little circle, right?
Yeah.
But now this allows them to make those connections
Mhm.
that they enjoy and hear about what people are doing, right? And so they've said to me that it was really great because I got to talk to these people whom I wouldn't have otherwise
Mhm.
spoken to. And the other thing that was interesting is one of the seniors told me that I actually got to meet somebody I was planning to meet for a long time, but somehow, in my inbox, that person's messages got buried.
Mm.
I forgot about it,
Mm.
and now suddenly that person was at my table,
Ah.
and so people are busy, right?
Yes.
Especially seniors,
Yes.
and so this. It's not bad intentions or neglect or whatever. So this provides those
Yes.
types of opportunities.
Mm.
So I think super easy intervention, right, to implement.
Mm. Just
Then,
to have that awareness, right, for companies, organizations, as well as individuals, right, to know that the power of networks and purposely do the intervention, as you said, or purposely from the individual's level, like reach out
yeah,
to especially new people.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then I think, if an event such as this is being organized, I would say the advice is make sure you go to it, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and some of the feedback I received was also like, I didn't expect it, but it was actually fun,
Mm.
So
It is.
have
It is
fun,
fun.
yeah.
Serendipity, right? So that's very
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. So, it can be fun too,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So the other really interesting um, intervention. I don't want to keep reusing that word, but I'm trying to think of a better word for it.
Organizational support. How about that?
Yeah, sure, sure. That's a nice one. Yeah, that conference support that
Conference support.
that you
Right.
can provide during events
Yes.
is this based on this article in Nature, which was written by I think it was 5 or 6 women
Mm.
who are from different research fields, all experienced networking barriers at
Mm.
conferences and events, and they um, instituted something and that they wrote about, which they called speed geeking.
Kind of like speed dating, but
Exactly,
okay.
exactly. They say it's
Tell, tell
inspired.
me about it. I want
It's
to hear.
inspired by speed dating. They say that in the article,
Hmm.
and here the idea is that they assign. So basically, they have tables, and say about 8 to 10 people per table. And then there are geeks who are experts, the equivalent of your conference, the
Mm.
people who speak at conferences, maybe they're sharing their research, right? So your speakers, they are the geeks. And so one geek is assigned to each table. And then the geek speaks about their area for 5 minutes
Hmm.
in their case, but you can decide what makes sense. And then the group, the 8 to 10 people, there's a Q&A session for 5 minutes. Okay?
Mm.
And then so after that 10 minutes, the geek moves to the next table.
Mhm.
So these geeks move around to all the tables until the geeks have circulated through all the tables in the room.
Mhm.
So essentially, what this allows is it allows access to that expert, like
Mm.
within that table,
Mm.
and a really conversational dynamic. So it changes the way firstly changes access. It also provides an opening point, right?
Mm.
So now you were there, you spoke about it, you were on this little table, then there's another chance later you can pick up on the conversation. So I thought that was a really neat, what did you call it? You gave it a good name.
Organizational support.
Organization support. Yes, yes.
Right. I think that one, the geek, uh, what's that called? It's now like the speed dating, speed geeking. Sorry, I was like trying to
Yeah.
make that metaphor. It reminds me very much of the search condition that you had. right? In a way that is increasing the quantity of your context. You are forced to talk to that person, but also it has a little flavor of the social condition that you had.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I like the connection that you made to the past, right? Because now, yeah, essentially within each table, you're connecting to a whole bunch of people, and then you're moving to the next table and connecting to the whole.
Quantity there, but
Mhm.
you are forced to have that conversation that is somehow nurturing the relationship. Right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
really nice. So, which leads us to the final question. I hate to end this conversation. Hopefully, you can join me another time to talk about the long-term effect of this organizational support, right? All right. So, we are both educators, right? And then we're not only talking about, for example, talking to women that are already in career, right? Like, for example, assistant professors or researchers at conferences. And then there are many young women, right? They could be undergraduates, graduate students, or high schoolers, or even younger. So, and then if they aspire to be a tech person, right, to pursue a career along that line. So, what advice would you give to them?
Okay. So that's a really good question. I would say, you know, I think being aware of these structural barriers is one thing.
Mm,
Because if you're not aware of the structural issues, you might you might be trying to network but not seeing the outcomes coming, right?
mm,
So that helps you understand, it may help you validate some of what you're experiencing. Just like Joe, you mentioned, right? Like you've seen at conferences such and such happen, right? So, but if you don't understand the structural issues underlying it, then it may become hard to understand why is it that, my efforts say are not having the same payoff, right?
yeah.
So that's one piece.
Mhm.
And the other piece is, again, to advocate for change, right? So you know, I go to these conference organizers every year and ask them, but they'll give me a slot for an hour and a half, right? And I do this uh, to create better outcomes.
Mm,
So bringing structure doesn't always, bringing structure into networking,
mm,
right? These changes in not asking people to just to network organically, which is fine, but providing structure so that they can network better.
mm,
It doesn't always have to come from the organizer, right? So you could say, because these are such simple um, things to implement, right? You could say, hey, can we do such and such at
mm,
this event?
mm.
And, that might help outcomes for them as well, right?
Yeah. I have one more comment to make
Mm-hmm.
based upon your research and our conversation, which is let's expect the long-term effect,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially for them who tend to be young, right? The high schoolers or
Mm-hmm.
undergraduates. Like if they pay more attention to the structure in the network, as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they probably will see the outcome of the cumulative advantage
Yeah, yeah.
more than people who are in the later stage in their career.
100%, right? Because if women have better outcomes from
Mhm.
these events, from when they're younger,
Yes.
then they're going to be more likely to be successful. They're going to stay in tech. So, it's really interesting that in tech, the attrition rate for women is significantly higher than men. So
Mm.
women are leaving tech at higher rates, right?
Mm.
So why? Because they don't feel their careers progressing.
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
and so if we have successful events where we feel like they're making the career changes, the progression in the career that they desire, then it's going to have a cumulative effect for sure.
Yes. Wonderful. So, do you have any other thoughts? Last piece of advice that you want to give to all the audience?
Well,
Maybe a few
I think
sentences.
one thing that one can't resist thinking about is this world of AI right today,
Yes.
and how it's disrupting everything.
Mm.
And I don't know, we are all figuring it out right now. But some of the early research says things like women are less likely to use AI than men. Women are more likely to be penalized for using AI than men. Right?
Mm.
Which is interesting. I think things are likely to change. These are early days.
Mhm.
But my advice is that we need to embrace AI. We need to stay on the top of it.
Cannot agree more. Yes,
And we need to see how professions are changing. They are going to change, right?
for sure.
And we can't sit back. I'm saying both men and women, right?
Yes.
Everybody, right? We can't
Yes,
sit
everybody.
back and let and just watch, right? So I think really educating yourself, being aware, embracing, using the AI technologies to do your jobs better. Or if you feel really your job is going to become obsolete because of it, remember that there are so many new jobs that are emerging because of AI.
Yes.
Right? So those are opportunities.
Mhm.
And I think we need to be a little bit dynamic now, and be aware of the changes coming our way.
Thank you so, so much, Sophia. I really enjoyed our conversation. I wish you could join me again on a different episode, especially talking about the long-term effect of networking. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I so enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thank you.